Hi, welcome to this database tutorial. You can see we're using a program called mySQL workbench. It's used to design tables and connect them. It's an efficient way of creating tables without knowing a lot of SQL syntax. So it's graphical in its user interface. You can see on the screen that I have two tables in this project. I have a users table and a recipes table. There's a thin line on the diagram connecting the two. And so I'm going to take you step by step in how to design something that turns out like this in the end. The application that will run on this database is a recipe collection. A user will log in and add his or her name to the users table. And then he or she will be able to add recipes to the recipe table. But we want to keep track of the user ID associated with each recipe. And so that's why we have these tables linked together. So let's follow along and do this together. The first thing you should do is download the mySQL workbench. It's available for Windows or Macintosh. So go to their website for MySQL, choose Downloads, and install. So you can see that I have the Macintosh version installed here. Once you start your program, you will notice that I have a local instance connection. So this is the database server that's on my computer. If you don't see that here, you can just add a connection using the plus sign. To set up a new connection, we will use a connection name called my local server. And then down here in host name, you can either type in localhost or this number here. For the MAMP server, the username is root. The password is also root, but I'm going to leave that out. Test your connection to see if it will talk to the database. Type in your password. Hopefully you get a success message. Let's click OK. So now I have a connection in my list. If I double click the connection, you will see that I am asked to log in perhaps, and then I can look at all of the databases that are on my server. And so these are from previous projects that I've made. Your list will be different. Now that we're connected to the server, I want to create a database on that server. Up here on the toolbar, there's a graphic icon that is labeled Create New Schema. New schema means new database. I'm going to call mine recipe lists. I will choose the apply button and I get the preview of the SQL command that will be run. So create schema recipe lists. I have a success message. And so now in my list of databases I can find recipe lists. There are several ways to create new tables using mySQL workbench. I'm going to use what's called a model. Choose the File menu and New Model. I'm going to select the idea called Add Diagram. Double-click it. And now I have an empty place where I can design my database and all the tables. I'm going to first of all place a new table. On the toolbar, there's an icon for Place a New Table. A simple table called Table 1. Let's turn this into our Users table. So I'll double-click here, rename this as Users table. Now I'm going to add the columns. So the first column I'm going to use is ID. I'm going to set some of these options here. We've seen this before. As AI is auto increment. Automatically it's selected primary key and NN, which is not null. In other words, it can't be blank. Some of the other things that we'll do. Let's call this the user name, and let's not check anything else. The username we can set as a varchar and up to, let's say, 256 characters. Let's also say user password and do the same for 256. Now that should be good enough for the users table, so I will close this screen. And you can see I have a small diagram for users table. Notice the key next to the ID. That tells me that this is a primary key. That's what the database uses as the unique column in this table. Every row has a unique number. Now it's time to add the recipes table. Let's go back and choose create a new table again. Let's double click the title and call this recipes table. The first column is usually ID. Let's set that for auto increment. What else do we want in a recipes table? We want a recipe title. Let's say the recipe ingredients. Now ingredients could be quite long, so instead of using a varchar, I'm going to type in the word text. Let's do the next column and call it recipe instructions. Let's also set this to text. And let's close this. Now these two tables exist independently, side by side with no links. I want to associate this so that one user can be associated with many different recipes, but each recipe has only one user associated with him. If you look at this group of icons, you will notice that they're all lines that have different numbers. 1 to 1 means if we were to connect these two tables using 1 to 1, a user could only have one recipe, a recipe could only have one user. That's not what we want. What we want is the next item. This is a one-to-many relationship, and so that one user is associated with many different recipes. Some of the other ones are listed below. We could do many-to-many. Those are more confusing. Let's start with the second one. So I click this icon. Now, which one do I begin with? I don't really know. I'm going to guess and maybe get it wrong. Let's say I want to associate one user, so I'm going to click on the ID, and then over here, click on this table, and it looks to me like I did it backwards. This little symbol here shows that there is one item associated with a little crow's foot or a little teepee of 3 different lines. That tells me that each one of these is associated with multiple IDs. Wrong way. So I'm going to right click on this and choose delete. It says, did you sure you want to do this? I'm going to delete them. Let's try and connect them using the other direction. So this time I'm going to select the same icon, start over here with the integer item, and then click on this table over here, and now I have the correct relationship. The line shows that there is one item on this end and multiple on this end. It also created a new row, or a new column you might say, in my recipes table. This is called a foreign key. And so it associates this primary key, the ID, with this table. We'll see in a minute what that looks like when the data starts flowing into the table. Below here is another SQL command that we don't have to memorize thanks to this tool. Now it's time to commit our database design to the actual database server. So far all we have is a diagram on the screen and no changes have been made to the actual database. Let's save our model first of all. So I'm going to call this recipe model. Now, to make this work with the database, we use the database menu. So the normal procedure is called forward engineer. So you take your diagram and engineer it into the actual SQL statements. However, on my computer, nothing happens. It seems to be not working like it's designed. So a second way to make this work is called synchronize model. And this brings up a screen where I can connect this to my server. So let's choose the continue button. You can see I'm connected to the local host. I'm going to ignore all of this because I don't understand it yet, since I'm new to mySQL workbench. The next screen says log in, so I use the word root for my password and I click OK. I've connected successfully. Let's continue. I have a diagram here that says we haven't quite found the schema in our target. So in other words, it doesn't know which database that we're trying to do this with. So I'm going to select here, and on the menu at the bottom I'm going to select the database for recipes. And I'm going to override the target. So now that means that I am going to be redesigning the database according to this diagram that we just designed. I'll click Continue. And continue again after a success. The next screen shows that I am connected to the recipe lists. I'm going to be modifying two tables, and it is going to be overriding something called NA. This is the first time that we're creating these tables, and so it is overriding a non-existing table. If you were to run this model a second time, you would see actual table names here. Let's click Continue. Now this is the advantage of using mySQL Workbench. Look at all of these commands that we would have to know if we wanted to create this and have it work properly. We can understand it quite easily though if you read it. This says create a table called recipe lists and users table. It tells us that we're going to have 3 different columns. It's going to tell us which primary key is going to be used. Further down we have some more constraints. So create another table, use these columns, the primary key is assigned, and now we have some other items that we wouldn't have normally known how to do. These are all connecting the two tables using constraints and foreign keys. So fortunately all of this is done correctly for us. We can choose Execute. Sometimes you have to log in and finish your process. Okay, so apparently it's done. Let's go look into our PHP myadmin, and we'll look at the new databases that are created here. So I logged in using my MAMP server, I refresh, and I have a new database called recipe lists. Inside of recipe lists I have 2 tables. You can see that the table names match the diagram that we had created earlier. We even have this foreign key listed. So this little gray key is a symbol indicating that it's connected to another table. Let's take a look at the users table. The users table has an ID, username, and password. Let's insert a new user. So we can leave the ID field blank. Let's come up with a person. So I'm going to put my first name in, and my password to log in is password1. Let's click Go. So it says it's been successfully inserted, and it tells me the SQL command that was just used. Let's insert another one. I'm going to use the same password but a different username. Let's insert one more and use the same data. Now if we browse this, we should see we have 3 users and 3 separate IDs. Now let's go add a recipe. So I'm going to choose the recipes table, insert a new recipe. Let's make pizza. Okay, so I have a recipe and I have some ingredients. And now the magic of these foreign keys shows up. When I select Users Table ID, I have 3 choices. They're listed just in reverse order. I can start with the ID number or start with the name. So let's put Nancy in the list and choose Go. Now the SQL command is listed here. Okay, this recipe is a little bit simpler. I'm going to assign this one to myself, so I'm going to choose user number 1 and Go. Now look at the browse, and you can see that I have the ID of each of these recipes, the name, the ingredients, the instructions. And here is the link between the 2 tables. The user's table ID shows that this is user number 2 and this is user number 1. And so now we're ready to move on to creating some code using this database that we just built. So let's go in the next video with that.